Hi, I'm Therese, and in this video we will learn how to create a musical instrument that plays different tones on a piezo using only one analog pin as an input. We will create something called a resistor ladder, which you can see a schematics of on page 79 in the projects book. A resistor ladder uses several resistors connected in parallel with 5 volts and ground, where each resistor also has a switch in series. This way, the analog pin can read different voltages depending on which switch we press. A piezo will then play different tones based on the voltage that the pin reads. To learn more about series and parallel circuits, read pages 28 and 29 in Project 1. With this circuit, we can create unique combinations of different voltage readings when pressing multiple switches at once. Let's create the circuit and you'll see. Make sure that nothing is connected to the board, and I've also started to prepare the board with the power and ground rails here. We start by connecting the piezo as we did in the previous project. One leg to ground and the other to digital pin 8. Now I'm going to connect the first switch to the circuit, which will return 5 volts to an analog pin when pressed. I'm placing the switch over the middle gap as we've done in the previous projects. One leg should go to 5 volts and the other to ground through a pull-down 10K resistor, as we did in Project 3, in order to not create a short circuit. But instead of having one long wire from the leg to the resistor, I'm going to split it into 3 smaller wires. This is so that I can connect the other switches and resistors to those rows later. I've found that this wire length is good for this, and I'm placing down these rows here like this. Now I can also connect other components to the circuit through these rows. I will connect analog pin 0 here so that we can read the voltage from the circuit. If I press this switch when everything is connected, this pin should read 5 volts. The next switch should be in a circuit that returns a bit less than 5 volts through the analog pin, so I will connect a 220 ohm resistor in series with it. If I press this button now, the analog pin should read a value that's a bit less than 5 volts due to this resistor here. We will use this information later in our code. The third circuit should return about half of 5 volts, so I will use a resistor in the same size as the pull-down resistor. The last circuit should return just a bit over 0 volts, so we will use the largest resistor here, which is 1 mega ohm. So now when we press this switch, the circuit will be closed here with no resistor on top. The only resistor we have is the 10K resistor, so the analog pin 0 will read 5 volts. If we close the circuit using this switch, we will have a 220 ohm resistor here, so the analog pin will read a little less than 5 volts. When we use this switch, we have a 10K resistor, which is as big as this resistor here, so we will read just half as 5 volts. And finally, if we use this switch, we will have just a bit over 0 volts because we have a really large resistor here. So the analog pin will read different voltages depending on which circuit we close using these 4 switches. Now you can connect the board to your computer and upload the code. In the beginning of our code, we create an array with different values for different notes that we will later use with the piezo and a tone library. Arrays can store multiple values where all values are given an index number so we know which element in the array we refer to. On page 82 in the projects book, you can read more about arrays. In the setup, we initialize serial communication to let us read the values from the analog pin. In the loop, we keep reading the value of analog pin 0, which you remember would read different values depending on which switch was pressed. Using an if-else function, we can determine which switch is being pressed and then play the corresponding tone using the tone library. If none of the buttons are pressed, we use no tone to keep the piezo silent. And that is it! If your project is not making any sound when you're pressing the buttons, you might need to tweak the analog read values. Use the serial monitor to read which values your pin reads when pressing each button. Next time, we will use a tilt switch to create a digital hourglass. See you then!